Edgewood University, or Paranormal Romance, written by Tanya Grice, Year 1, Episode 18, Worst Intentions, Part 2. When working on a project, remember to always check your work before you upload. You never know, you may have forgotten the half end of an episode. LOL. Layla and Connor crept up the stone steps and opened the door. Connor peered out and saw they were in a strange house. "Where are we?" he whispered, and Layla shook her head. Suddenly, they heard footsteps, and Connor pulled back. He signaled for Layla to be quiet, and she nodded. He listened to the footsteps move away and grabbed her hand. They crept out of the door and down the hall. They came to a corner, and Connor peered around it. He didn't see anyone and pulled Layla down the next hallway. They approached another corner, and he saw a door leading outside. He looked at Layla, smiled, and nodded. He pulled her toward the door and heard a zap. Layla groaned, let go of his hand, and fell on the floor. He looked at the warlock and growled. Suddenly, Connor was zapped from behind, and he cringed, groaned, and fell beside Layla. The warlocks grabbed the metal collars, snapped them around their necks, and pulled them to their feet. Layla whimpered, looking at Connor, and he sighed, looking at the floor. "Come on, you two, it's showtime," said a warlock gruffly as the two fairy guards bound Connor's hands behind him and Layla's in front of her. The warlock snickered and led them out of the house toward the schoolyard. Layla looked at Connor and reached for his hand. He intertwined his fingers with hers and pulled her close behind him. "We'll figure out something," he whispered, and she only nodded sadly. Tyler, Faith, Cassidy, Cody, Alex, and Bailey lined up with the other students, grabbed their chairs from the great hall, and headed outside toward the schoolyard. The students set their chairs up, sat down, and waited for the assembly to start, as everyone was scared and afraid Mr. Tate was going to kill Layla and Connor. Faith looked at Tyler sadly, and he held her hand and rubbed her shoulder. "We don't know what's going on yet, but if my father brings Layla and Connor out in those contraptions, we will interrupt this whole thing," he whispered, and she nodded. "What are we going to do? What's the plan?" asked Cassidy, and Tyler smirked. "You'll see," he said with glowing eyes, and she only nodded. "Quiet down," said Nate, the headmaster's assistant, and everyone hushed. "Thank you for coming out this evening. As you know, the headmaster has a plan to save us all, and now we are about to witness this magnificent event," he said, and Tyler and a few other students scoffed. Peter walked before the crowd, and Tyler growled, "I am glad you all have come. Now, when the guests of honor arrive, we can get this thing started," said Peter. Tyler's and Faith's eyes widened, seeing the warlock and fairy guards lead Layla and Connor in front of them with metal collars around their necks. "Holy shit!" exclaimed Faith, and Tyler snarled. Layla saw Tyler and growled at Peter. "You're insane." Peter looked at her and smiled. "We're all a little crazy, but not this time, my dear. I'm doing what needs to be done. I can't wait to see you 6 feet under, again," she growled. Peter's smile faded as he walked toward her and backhanded her. Tyler, Faith, Alex, and Cody growled, and Cassidy and Bailey turned their heads. "You will show respect to the one who bit you," Peter growled, and Layla sneered at him with blood dripping from her lip. She spit a mouthful at the headmaster, and he cried in disgust. Connor growled, raising his head and roaring into the sky, making everyone cover their ears. Peter smiled, looking at Connor and wiping the blood off his face. "There's that temper, old friend. Let it out. You definitely picked a beauty to be your mate," he said. Layla sneered at him, and Peter laughed. You don't scare me. Those restraints are enchanted and only bend to the will of certain beings connected to the land's magic," he explained. Layla glanced at Connor and blew a sweaty strand of hair from her face. She closed her eyes, feeling the magic of the land course through her veins, and the bind started to break away. Tyler growled, shaking his head, and he ran toward his father. Faith, Bailey, Cassidy, Alex, and Cody looked at each other and chased after him. "Dad, stop," yelled Tyler, and Peter looked at his son. "Tyler, they're here to fulfill a purpose. I'm not going to hurt them." He looked at his father and snarled, "You are not using them as bait. This is not up for debate, son. This is what has to be done," said Peter. Layla sighed in relief as the collar crumbled apart, and she looked at Connor. He smiled, and she turned toward the headmaster. She snarled, and Peter looked at her in surprise. "Oh," he gasped.